Ethan Morgan stood pressed against the stone colonnade at the edge of the great plaza, trying to make himself as small and inconspicuous as possible among the thousands gathered to witness the Royal Ascension Procession. He clutched his diplomatic credentials, more from nervous habit than necessity, since no one was checking them at this point, and kept his eyes on the ceremony unfolding in the plaza's center. He'd been on the Thalorian homeworld for only 3 months, working as a junior cultural liaison in the human diplomatic mission. The position sounded more important than it actually was. Mostly he filed reports about Thalorian cultural practices, translated mundane documents that more senior diplomats didn't have time for, and tried to learn the impossibly complex web of customs and hierarchies that governed this ancient civilization. The Thalorians were a striking species. Tall, averaging nearly 2 meters, with elegant, elongated proportions that made humans look stocky by comparison. Their skin shifted through subtle metallic hues depending on emotion and health, creating an ever-changing iridescence that was beautiful to observe. Their features were angular and refined, their movements carrying an inherent grace that made even their most casual gestures look choreographed. Their culture was older than human civilization by several millennia. Their traditions and beliefs predated humanity's written history, and their royal family was considered semi-divine, not gods exactly, but beings whose bloodline connected them to forces that humans barely had conceptual frameworks to understand. Today's procession marked Princess Kaelira's formal recognition as heir to the throne, a ceremony that happened only once in a generation. The entire capital had turned out to witness it, hundreds of thousands of Thalorians filling the great plaza and surrounding streets, creating a sea of shifting metallic colors as their collective emotions played across their skin. The human diplomatic mission had been granted permission to send observers as a gesture of goodwill between species. It was considered a significant honor. Ambassador Chen had attended with the senior staff, positioned in a dignified viewing area near the palace entrance. Ethan was here because someone from the Cultural Liaison Office needed to attend, and everyone more senior had better things to do. So he'd been given credentials, told to observe respectfully from an appropriate distance, and reminded not to do anything that might create a diplomatic incident. He'd found his position at the plaza's edge, pressed against a stone colonnade among other lower status observers, and had been standing here for nearly 2 hours watching the preliminary ceremonies. The procession itself was magnificent. Thousands of participants moved through choreographed patterns that apparently had symbolic meanings Ethan didn't fully grasp despite months of study. Their clothing shifted colors in synchronized waves, creating visual effects that seemed impossible until you remembered Thalorian textile technology was centuries beyond human capabilities. The music was overwhelming, not loud exactly, but resonant in ways that made it feel like sound was vibrating through bones rather than just reaching ears through air. Ethan's translator implant couldn't process the lyrics, suggesting they were in an ancient form of Thalorian that predated the modern language database. Princess Kaelira walked at the procession center, surrounded by her honor guard. She was young, perhaps equivalent to human early 20s, though Thalorian aging made precise comparisons difficult. Her skin showed the pale gold that indicated royal bloodline, and she carried herself with the poise expected of someone raised from birth to eventually rule. Behind her, exactly 3 steps back, walked Queen Theressa. The queen's skin showed the deeper bronze that came with age and accumulated authority. Her expression was serene, but her eyes tracked her daughter with maternal attention that needed no cultural translation. The king was absent. Thalorian royal succession passed through the maternal line exclusively, and fathers played ceremonial rather than governing roles in royal dynamics. Ethan watched, fascinated despite his intention to remain professionally detached. There was something about the ceremony that human culture didn't quite achieve, a quality that felt less like witnessing human-made spectacle and more like observing natural phenomena. The patterns, the music, the synchronized movements all created an effect that felt organic rather than performed. The procession moved through the plaza following paths that apparently held symbolic significance, approaching from the direction that represented past, moving through the present represented by the plaza's center, and heading toward the future represented by the palace gates. As they approached Ethan's section of the plaza, he pressed himself further against the colonnade, conscious of being human among Thalorians, of being an outsider witnessing something sacred to their culture. He was trying to observe with appropriate respect while remaining as invisible as possible. The procession was perhaps 20 meters from his position when Princess Kaelira suddenly stopped walking. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The carefully choreographed movement simply halted. Musicians faltered mid-phrase. Dancers froze mid-gesture. Thousands of participants and observers fell silent in rippling waves spreading outward from the center. Ethan's first thought was that something had gone wrong, some kind of emergency or disruption, but no one looked alarmed exactly. Just confused, uncertain. Princess Kaelira stood absolutely still for a long moment, her head tilting slightly as if listening to something no one else could hear. Her metallic skin shifted through colors rapidly, patterns Ethan didn't recognize, but which clearly indicated intense internal processing. Then she turned, her body rotating with deliberate precision, facing directly toward the colonnade where Ethan stood. Her arm rose, her hand extended, her finger pointed with absolute certainty, directly at him. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Around him, other observers turned to see what the princess was pointing at, their expressions suggesting they expected to find something significant or unusual behind him. But there was nothing there except stone colonnade and empty space. Just him, one unremarkable human diplomat pressed against stone, trying desperately to understand what was happening. The silence in the plaza was absolute now. Thousands upon thousands of beings watching as Princess Kaelira's pointing finger remained fixed on Ethan, her expression conveying a certainty that made his stomach drop with anxiety he didn't understand. Queen Theressa, who had been walking 3 steps behind her daughter, froze mid-step. Her expression shifted through emotions too quickly for Ethan to identify, but her skin flashed through color patterns that his limited cultural knowledge associated with profound shock. The honor guard surrounding the princess had gone rigid, their hands moving toward weapons, not in threat, but in pure instinctive response to something unexpected and significant. One of the queen's advisors, an elderly Thalorian whose deep bronze skin indicated advanced age and accumulated wisdom, moved forward quickly, speaking in rapid Thalorian that Ethan's translation implant struggled to process. The advisor was clearly alarmed, clearly trying to redirect the princess's attention or understand what she was indicating. But Princess Kaelira didn't waver. Her pointing finger remained absolutely steady, fixed on Ethan with a precision that suggested she was indicating something specific rather than gesturing vaguely toward his general area. She spoke, her voice carrying across the silent plaza in tones that suggested absolute conviction. Threnal kesh, Mareth vas'alon. Ethan's translator implant processed the words and rendered them in standard with notations indicating these were formal, archaic phrases. Fate recognition, the bond is claimed. The effect on the assembled Thalorians was electric. Ethan saw shock ripple through the crowd, metallic skin flashing through colors, body language shifting to postures he'd learned indicated everything from confusion to awe to alarm. The queen's frozen posture broke. She moved to her daughter's side with speed that contradicted her earlier stately pace, her hand gripping Princess Kaelira's arm. They spoke in urgent, quiet tones that Ethan's translator couldn't pick up over the ambient noise of thousands of beings reacting to whatever had just occurred. The elderly advisor had produced what looked like a ceremonial artifact, a crystalline device that pulsed with faint light. He held it up toward Ethan, and Ethan felt a strange sensation like being scanned or measured by something his human senses couldn't properly process. More officials were converging on the princess now, their skin colors shifting through patterns Ethan had learned indicated agitation and urgent consultation. The honor guard had formed a tighter perimeter, though whether to protect the princess from something or to contain some situation, Ethan couldn't tell. And through all of it, Princess Kaelira's pointing finger remained steady, aimed at him with unwavering certainty, her expression suggesting she was as surprised by what was happening as everyone else, but not questioning it. Ethan stood frozen against the colonnade, his mind racing through everything he'd done since arriving at the plaza. desperately trying to understand what protocol he'd violated or what mistake he'd made that would cause the heir to the Thalorian throne to point at him and speak words that had apparently thrown the entire Royal Ascension Procession into crisis. He hadn't done anything. He'd been standing here quietly, observing as instructed, maintaining proper respectful distance from the ceremony. He hadn't spoken, hadn't moved inappropriately, hadn't violated any protocol he was aware of. But something had happened. Something significant enough to stop the procession, shock the queen, and create visible confusion among thousands of observers. And whatever it was, it centered entirely on him. Within seconds of Princess Kaelira's declaration, Ethan found himself surrounded by Thalorian royal guards. They materialized from positions he hadn't realized they occupied, forming a perimeter around him that was simultaneously protective and confining. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but their skin colors shifted through patterns that his limited knowledge associated with high alertness. One of them spoke in Thalorian too rapid for his translator to fully process, but the gesture accompanying it was universal. "Stay where you are, don't move." Ethan had no intention of moving. His legs felt disconnected from his body, his mind still trying to process what had just happened. The princess had pointed at him. She'd spoken words about fate and bonds. And now he was surrounded by guards while the entire Royal Ascension Procession stood frozen in apparent crisis. The Queen's voice rose, loud enough now for Ethan's translator to catch it despite the distance. "This cannot be. He is human, an outsider. The Threnal does not manifest across species barriers. There must be error in the recognition." "There is no error, Mother." Princess Kaelira's voice was calmer, but carried absolute conviction. "I felt it, I saw it. The recognition is absolute and undeniable." She was still pointing at Ethan, though her arm must have been aching by now. Her skin had settled into a steady pattern of pale gold shot through with silver, colors Ethan didn't recognize, but which caused gasps and murmurs among the nearest Thalorian observers. The elderly advisor with the crystalline device was speaking urgently to the Queen, showing her readings or measurements that Ethan couldn't see from his position. The Queen's expression shifted from shock to something more complex: concern, confusion, and what might have been resignation. The advisor approached Ethan, flanked by guards who made clear he wasn't to move from his position. Up close, the elderly Thalorian's eyes were striking, deep amber with vertical pupils that tracked movement with unsettling precision. "Human Ethan Morgan." The advisor's translator device rendered his speech with formal precision. "I am Mareth, first counselor to the Queen. You will answer questions with complete honesty. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Ethan's voice came out steadier than he felt. "Though I don't understand what's happening or what I did wrong." "You did nothing wrong." Mareth's expression suggested this made the situation more complicated rather than less. "But something unprecedented has occurred, and we must understand it quickly." He held up the crystalline device, passing it in front of Ethan again. Ethan felt that strange scanning sensation, like invisible pressure moving across his skin. "Have you had previous contact with Princess Kaelira? Any interaction before this moment?" "No, sir. I've seen her in palace corridors during my diplomatic duties, but never close enough for conversation. I've never been formally introduced." "Have you performed any ritual, spoken any invocation, attempted any connection to royal lineage or fate threads?" "No, sir. I don't even know what those things mean." Mareth studied the crystalline device's readings, his skin shifting through colors that suggested deep concentration. Yet the resonance is undeniable. The princess's declaration carries the harmonic signature consistent with genuine Threnal kesh recognition. This should not be possible between human and Thalorian, yet all measurements confirm it has occurred. "I still don't understand what Threnal kesh means," Ethan said quietly. "It is ancient recognition, a manifestation of fate bond between two beings whose destinies are entwined in ways that transcend choice or planning." Mareth's tone suggested he was explaining something fundamental that any Thalorian would know from childhood. When two individuals are fate-bound, one of them, typically the one who perceives the bond first, claims it through pointing and formal declaration. The gesture is involuntary, driven by recognition that operates below conscious thought. He paused, his amber eyes studying Ethan with intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable. Princess Kaelira has claimed Threnal kesh with you. This creates binding obligation under our most ancient laws. If her recognition is genuine, and preliminary measurements suggest it is, then you are now fate-bound to the royal house. Ethan's mind struggled to process this. But we've never met, I don't know her, how can we be fate-bound? The Threnal does not require prior acquaintance. It recognizes what already exists at levels deeper than conscious awareness. Verath's expression was difficult to read. You are confused and alarmed. This is understandable. But understand, the princess did not choose this any more than you did. She felt recognition and responded according to instincts older than our recorded history. The queen and Princess Kaelira were approaching now, the procession participants parting to create a path. The queen's expression was controlled, but her skin colors betrayed emotional turmoil. Princess Kaelira had finally lowered her pointing arm, but her gaze remained fixed on Ethan with that same certainty. Ethan Morgan, human diplomat. The queen's voice carried authority that made everyone in hearing distance immediately silent. My daughter has invoked Threnal kesh, claiming fate bond with you. This is unprecedented. The Threnal has never manifested between Thalorian and non-Thalorian in our recorded history. She paused, her metallic skin shifting through patterns that Ethan's translator noted indicated complex emotional processing. However, all preliminary measurements suggest her recognition is genuine. The resonance patterns are consistent with valid Threnal manifestation. This creates a situation with profound implications for both our species' relations and our internal succession planning. Your Majesty, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, Ethan said, trying to keep his voice respectful despite his confusion and growing anxiety. I was just observing the procession as authorized. I didn't do anything to cause this. No one causes Threnal recognition, Princess Kaelira said, speaking directly to him for the first time. Her voice was melodic, carrying harmonics that made his translator struggle slightly with rendering. It simply occurs when fate designates two beings as essential to each other's paths. I saw you standing against the colonnade and felt recognition so powerful it overrode all conscious thought. My body responded before my mind could question or resist. Her expression showed something between certainty and vulnerability. I do not know why fate has bound us. I do not understand how Threnal could manifest across species barriers that we believed were absolute, but the recognition is undeniable. I feel it even now, a connection that defies explanation but is absolutely present. This must be investigated thoroughly. Another official interjected, a Thalorian whose elaborate clothing and bronze skin suggested high status. We cannot simply accept unprecedented cross-species Threnal without extensive verification and cultural consultation. The verification has begun, Mareth said, holding up his crystalline device. But the princess's declaration was made before thousands of witnesses. The procession was halted by recognized Threnal kesh claim. We cannot simply dismiss or ignore it, regardless of its unprecedented nature. The queen made a decision visible in her posture and skin patterns. The procession is suspended. The ceremony will resume at a date to be determined after proper consultation and verification. She focused on Ethan. You will accompany us to the palace. You are not under arrest, but you are now involved in matters of cultural and legal significance that require immediate attention. Ethan found himself escorted, firmly but not roughly, through the dispersing crowd, surrounded by guards whose presence made clear he had no choice about compliance. The thousands of observers were being moved by officials, the plaza clearing with practiced efficiency that suggested established crisis protocols. He caught glimpses of other humans in the crowd, members of the diplomatic mission who'd been observing from various positions. They looked as confused as he felt, probably wondering what their junior cultural liaison had done to disrupt the entire Royal Ascension Procession. The walk to the palace took 15 minutes through corridors Ethan had never been permitted to access before. The architecture grew increasingly elaborate, the guards more numerous, the security measures more sophisticated. He was brought to a chamber that was clearly designed for important meetings. Soaring ceilings covered in murals depicting Thalorian history, holographic displays showing script in ancient forms he couldn't read, seating arranged in hierarchical patterns around a central raised platform. The queen entered moments later, followed by Princess Kaelira, Mareth, and several other officials whose precise roles Ethan could only guess at. Their skin colors had calmed somewhat from the crisis patterns in the plaza, settling into shades that suggested serious contemplation rather than active alarm. The queen settled into a chair on the raised platform, her posture conveying authority that needed no cultural translation. Princess Kaelira took a position beside her mother, standing rather than sitting, her gaze periodically returning to Ethan with that same expression of certainty mixed with confusion. "We must understand what has occurred and determine appropriate response," the queen said, addressing the assembled officials. "First, Counselor Mareth, present your preliminary findings." Mareth stepped forward, his crystalline device projecting holographic displays that showed readings Ethan couldn't interpret. The princess's Threnal declaration carried all standard harmonic markers consistent with genuine recognition. The resonance patterns match historical records of previous Threnal manifestations across 3,000 years of documented cases. He gestured, and the display shifted. However, there are anomalies consistent with the unprecedented cross-species nature of this recognition. The resonance includes harmonics we have not previously measured, suggesting the human's different biology creates variation in the fate bond signature. Is it possible the human somehow artificially triggered the recognition? Another official asked. Some technology or technique that mimicked Threnal resonance. Extremely unlikely, Mareth replied. Our measurements detected no artificial resonance generators, no technology capable of producing the complex harmonic patterns associated with genuine Threnal. Moreover, the princess's own testimony suggests the recognition felt organic and overwhelming, consistent with traditional accounts of Threnal manifestation. He looked at Ethan. The human appears genuinely confused and alarmed by the situation. This is consistent with someone who did not intend or anticipate Threnal recognition. The queen spoke. If the recognition is genuine, we must address its implications under our laws and customs. Princess Kaelira explained to the human what Threnal kesh means in practical terms. Princess Kaelira turned to face Ethan directly. The Threnal kesh, when legitimately claimed, creates binding connection under our most ancient laws. You are now considered fate-bound to me, and through me to the royal house. This carries specific obligations, and rights that neither of us can refuse without violating fundamental cultural law. She paused, her skin shifting through colors that might have indicated uncertainty. You will become part of the royal household. You cannot be dismissed or sent away without formal release that requires consent from both bonded parties. You will have certain rights of access and consultation. And most significantly, your fate is now considered linked to mine. What affects me affects you, and what affects you affects me, in ways both practical and mystical. Ethan's legs felt weak. He was grateful for the guard's steadying hand on his shoulder. I'm just a junior cultural liaison. I don't have any authority or importance. There has to be some mistake. The Threnal does not make mistakes, Princess Kaelira said firmly. It recognizes what fate has already determined. You are important because fate has designated you so, regardless of your current position or status. The queen added, this situation creates unprecedented complications. A human fate bound to the heir of our throne has never occurred. It will require extensive legal and cultural consultation to determine how to proceed. She focused on Ethan, her expression unreadable. But understand this, if the Threnal is genuine, and all evidence suggests it is, then you are now bound to us in ways that transcend diplomatic status or political convenience. Your life has changed irrevocably, Ethan Morgan, and we must all adapt to this new reality that fate has imposed upon us. Ethan spent the next 3 days in a state of controlled crisis, confined to guest quarters in the palace, while Thalorian cultural authorities, religious officials, legal experts, and diplomatic representatives debated what to do about the unprecedented situation he'd somehow created just by standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The quarters were luxurious by any standard, far beyond what a junior cultural liaison would normally access. Private chambers with Thalorian furnishings adjusted for human proportions, access to human-compatible food, even a holographic entertainment system with some human content available. But he was definitely not free to leave. Guards were posted outside his door, respectful but unmovable when he'd tested whether he could go for a walk through the palace gardens. Ambassador Chen visited on the second day, her expression caught between sympathy and bureaucratic frustration. The Thalorian government has been very clear that this situation falls under their cultural law rather than diplomatic protocols. I filed protests about your confinement, but legally they're treating this as an internal matter involving their royal succession. What does that mean for me? Ethan asked. It means your status as human diplomat is essentially superseded by whatever this Threnal thing is. Chen's tone suggested she'd been reading extensively about Thalorian customs. If their cultural authorities determine the princess's recognition is valid, you become bound to the royal house under their ancient laws. The human embassy has very limited leverage to challenge that. She paused, studying him with concern. How are you holding up? I don't know, Ethan admitted. This entire situation feels surreal. I was just observing a ceremony. Now apparently I'm fate-bound to an alien princess through customs I don't understand and can't refuse. The cultural experts I've consulted say Threnal recognition is taken extremely seriously by Thalorians. It's not just ceremonial, it's considered literally binding, a manifestation of destiny itself. Chen's expression was sympathetic. I'm sorry you've been caught up in this. We're doing what we can diplomatically, but the reality is that Thalorian cultural law may supersede our ability to extract you from the situation. After Chen left, Ethan sat alone in his quarters, trying to process everything. His life had been upended by one moment in a plaza, a princess pointing at him with absolute certainty, claiming a bond he hadn't known existed until her finger singled him out from thousands of observers. Mareth visited later that day, carrying his crystalline measuring device and several data tablets covered in Thalorian script. The elderly counselor settled into a chair across from Ethan, with the air of someone preparing for extended conversation. I have been studying your case extensively, Mareth began. Consulting historical records, religious texts, legal precedents. The Threnal kesh is ancient, references to it appear in our oldest surviving documents, predating our current governmental structures by millennia. He pulled up holographic displays showing Thalorian text that Ethan's translator struggled to render. Traditionally, we understood Threnal as biologically specific to our species, a resonance between individuals whose genetic and spiritual characteristics created compatibility at fundamental levels. The assumption was that this resonance required shared biology to manifest. But it manifested between me and Princess Kaelira, Ethan said, even though we're different species. Yes, which suggests our understanding was incomplete. Mareth's skin shifted through colors, suggesting intellectual excitement. Perhaps Threnal operates on deeper levels than biology, on fundamental resonances of destiny or fate that transcend physical form. Or perhaps there is more biological compatibility between our species than we realized, creating unexpected resonance potential. He studied Ethan with intensity that made him uncomfortable. You are an unprecedented phenomenon, the first confirmed case of cross-species Threnal recognition in our recorded history. This makes you simultaneously extremely significant and extremely problematic for our cultural and legal frameworks. What does that mean practically? Ethan asked. What happens to me if they determine the recognition is valid? You become part of the royal household, Mareth said simply. Specifically, you become fate-bound to Princess Kaelira. The precise nature of that bond depends on its strength and character, which we are still measuring. But at minimum, you will be relocated permanently to palace quarters. You will be granted security clearances and access rights normally restricted to inner court. You will be expected to attend the princess during certain ceremonies and consultations. He paused, and most significantly, your fate becomes linked to hers in both legal and mystical senses. What affects her will affect you. You are considered essential to her path, and she to yours. This bond cannot be easily broken without consent from both parties, and such breaking is considered deeply unfortunate in our culture. I didn't ask for any of this, Ethan said quietly. No one asks for Threnal recognition. It simply occurs, and we must accept the implications. Verath's expression was sympathetic despite his evident fascination with the unprecedented situation. But consider, the princess did not choose this either. She felt overwhelming recognition and responded instinctively according to cultural programming older than conscious thought. She is now bound to you as much as you are to her. Princess Kaelira herself visited on the third day, requesting a private audience with only her personal guards present. Ethan had been expecting someone more formal and regal, but she entered his quarters with body language suggesting uncertainty rather than royal authority. "May I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the chair Verath had occupied during his visit. "Of course, Your Highness." She settled into the chair with grace that seemed inherent to Thalorian physiology. Up close, Ethan could see the subtle color shifts in her skin, pale gold shot through with silver patterns that apparently held significance he didn't understand. Her eyes were striking, amber with those vertical pupils that tracked movement with precision human eyes couldn't match. "I wanted to speak with you directly, away from councils and officials and endless debate about legal precedents," she said, "to apologize for the disruption to your life and to explain what I felt during the procession." "You don't need to apologize, Your Highness." "Kaelira," she interrupted gently, "if we are fate-bound, as all evidence suggests, then formality between us is unnecessary. Please call me Kaelira." "Kaelira, then?" Ethan tried out the name, his human vocal cords struggling slightly with the harmonics. "I still don't fully understand what happened." "Neither do I, entirely. The Threnal has never manifested like this before, between species, between strangers, in such public circumstances." Her skin shifted through colors that might have indicated embarrassment or vulnerability. "But I will tell you what I experienced, because you deserve to understand." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intent. "I was walking through the procession, focused on the ceremony and the responsibilities I was accepting. My mind was occupied with the formal words I would need to speak, the patterns I would need to follow. Then I felt something shift, like reality itself adjusting around me. And suddenly I saw you. Saw me how? Not just visually. I saw you with senses I cannot properly explain. You were standing against the colonnade, trying to be inconspicuous, watching with respectful attention. And I knew, with absolute certainty that bypassed all rational thought, that you were essential to my path, that our fates were entangled in ways that would unfold across time, that I had found something I had been searching for without knowing I was searching." Her voice carried conviction that made the explanation feel real despite how mystical it sounded. The recognition was overwhelming. My body responded before my mind could question or resist. "I pointed at you because pointing is how we claim Threnal when we perceive it. I spoke the formal words because they emerged from instinct rather than conscious decision." She paused, her expression showing something between certainty and vulnerability. "I am sorry that my recognition has complicated your life so dramatically, but I cannot regret feeling it. The Threnal is considered sacred in our culture, a gift from fate itself. To deny it would be to reject something fundamental about how destiny operates in our world." Ethan struggled to find appropriate response. "I don't know how to process this. Where I come from, relationships and bonds develop gradually, through choice and interaction. This feels like having destiny imposed without any agency in the matter. I understand that frustration, but consider, you had agency in being the person you are, the one whose essential nature resonated with mine at frequencies deep enough for Threnal recognition. You did not choose the recognition itself, but you chose to become someone worthy of fate's attention." She smiled slightly. "That is the traditional Thalorian view, at least. I do not know if it provides comfort or merely shifts responsibility in ways that feel unsatisfying." "I'm still trying to understand what this means for my future," Ethan admitted. "What happens to me if the cultural authorities confirm the recognition is valid?" "You become mine," Kaelira said simply, then caught herself. "That is imprecise language. You become bonded to me. We become essential to each other. Your fate and mine intertwine in ways that will manifest across time. The specific nature depends on the bond's strength and character, which the councils are still measuring." Her skin shifted through colors that suggested careful thought. "But practically, you will live in the palace. You will attend me during certain ceremonies and consultations. You will have rights and responsibilities within the royal household. And you will be protected by royal authority. Any threat to you becomes threat to me, and therefore to the throne itself. That sounds like I lose all freedom and independence. No, you gain position and protection, but you also retain agency within the bond's structure. You can refuse unreasonable demands. You can maintain relationships outside the royal household. You can pursue interests and work that fulfills you. She paused. You simply cannot leave, cannot break the bond without my consent, cannot fully separate your fate from mine. That still sounds like imprisonment, however gentle. Perhaps, or perhaps it is the price of being recognized as essential by destiny itself. Kaelira's expression was sympathetic. I do not pretend this is fair to you. You did nothing to seek this bond. But it exists now, confirmed by every measurement and observation. We must both adapt to this new reality that fate has imposed upon us. The cultural authorities' final determination came on the 7th day after the procession. Princess Kaelira's Threnal recognition was genuine, unprecedented but valid under ancient laws, and binding upon both parties regardless of species difference or prior acquaintance. Ethan was summoned to a formal audience in the throne room, a space of overwhelming grandeur that made him feel insignificant despite being the reason for the gathering. The queen sat on the throne proper, Princess Kaelira stood to her right, and dozens of officials and counselors filled the chamber in carefully arranged hierarchical positions. Ethan Morgan, human diplomat. The queen's voice carried formal authority. After extensive consultation, measurement, and legal review, we have determined that my daughter's Threnal kesh recognition was genuine manifestation of fate bond between you and the royal house. She paused, her skin shifting through colors suggesting complex emotions. This is unprecedented in our history. Never has Threnal manifested between Thalorian and non-Thalorian, but the evidence is conclusive. The recognition occurred, the resonance is measurable, and the bond exists whether we fully understand its mechanisms or not. Mareth stepped forward, holding his crystalline device. The measurements show compatibility at fundamental levels that transcend biology. Your essential nature resonates with Princess Kaelira's at frequencies we can detect but not fully explain. This creates fate bond that our laws recognize as sacred and binding. The queen continued, "You are hereby granted formal status within the royal household as Threnal bound to the heir. You will be relocated to quarters in the palace complex. You will be assigned security clearances appropriate to your position. You will attend Princess Kaelira during certain ceremonies, consultations, and formal functions where fate-bonded presence is required or appropriate." Her expression was difficult to read. "You are also granted protection under royal authority. Any threat to you is considered threat to the princess and therefore to the throne. You cannot be compelled to leave Thalorian territory without the princess's consent. And you cannot be dismissed from your position without mutual agreement between bonded parties." "What about my work with the human embassy?" Ethan asked. "That will be renegotiated," Ambassador Chen said from her position among the observers. "You'll maintain diplomatic status technically, but your primary role shifts to your position within the royal household. The embassy will work with palace administration to determine appropriate arrangements." Princess Kaelira spoke. "I understand this is not the life you chose or anticipated, but I hope, in time, you will find value in the bond we share. I promise to honor it with respect for your humanity and your autonomy within the structure fate has imposed upon us both." The formal ceremony concluded, but the practical reality was only beginning. Ethan spent the following weeks settling into his new role with mixture of anxiety and gradual acceptance. His quarters in the palace complex were substantial, multiple rooms adjusted for human comfort, with access to both human and Thalorian amenities. He had security clearances that let him move through spaces previously restricted, attended by guards who were simultaneously protective and monitoring. He participated in ceremonies he barely understood, standing beside Princess Kaelira while officials performed rituals in ancient Thalorian, and musicians played harmonics that made his bones vibrate. His presence was apparently significant even when he did nothing. The fate-bonded simply being present carried meaning in Thalorian culture. Princess Kaelira, as she'd insisted he call her, treated him with formal courtesy that gradually shifted toward something more genuine as they navigated their unprecedented situation together. They met regularly for consultations that were part obligation and part actual conversation, trying to understand the bond that connected them. I have been thinking about what the Threnal means beyond legal and cultural obligations, she said during one such meeting, several weeks after his formal integration into the royal household. About what fate might be communicating through this bond. And what conclusion have you reached? Ethan asked. That perhaps fate operates on scales larger than individual choice or understanding. You were present at my ascension ceremony, standing quietly among thousands of observers. You were doing nothing remarkable, just observing with respectful attention. Yet somehow, in that moment, destiny recognized you as essential to my path. She met his eyes directly. I do not know why. Perhaps you will serve as bridge between our species in ways neither of us can yet perceive. Perhaps you provide perspective I need for governance in ways I cannot currently understand. Perhaps the bond exists for reasons that will only become clear years from now. But it exists. And I have learned to trust that Threnal recognition, however inconvenient or mysterious, carries wisdom we must honor even when we cannot comprehend it. Ethan found himself responding with honesty. I never expected my quiet observation of a ceremony to bind me to a royal house through ancient customs I didn't even know existed. But I'm starting to understand that sometimes destiny doesn't ask permission. It simply recognizes what already is and demands we acknowledge it. Well said. Kaelira's skin shifted through colors that Ethan was learning to interpret as approval. We are bound now, you and I, not by choice, but by recognition of something deeper than choice. We must honor that bond with integrity and try to understand what wisdom fate saw that we cannot yet perceive. Months passed. Ethan's role evolved from confused outsider to established member of the royal household. He learned Thalorian customs, participated in ceremonies with increasing competence, and developed genuine rapport with Kaelira beyond the formal bond structure. The human embassy adjusted to his unusual position, recognizing that he'd become a figure of unexpected significance in human Thalorian relations. Ambassador Chen used him as informal liaison for matters requiring understanding of both species' perspectives. Mareth continued his studies of the unprecedented cross-species Threnal, publishing papers that apparently created extensive academic discussion about the nature of fate bonds and destiny recognition. He shared his findings with Ethan periodically. The measurements continue to show genuine resonance between you and the princess at fundamental levels. Not biological exactly, something deeper. A compatibility of essential nature that transcends physical form. Mareth's expression suggested intellectual satisfaction mixed with ongoing curiosity. You are proof that Threnal operates beyond species barriers. That destiny recognizes connections at scales our previous understanding was too narrow to encompass. He paused, his amber eyes studying Ethan thoughtfully. You stood quietly in a plaza, believing yourself invisible and insignificant. A princess pointed at you with instinctive certainty born from recognition older than rational thought. A queen froze mid-step, acknowledging an ancient sign that defied her expectations and challenged her plans. And in that moment, your quiet presence triggered something far older than law or politics. A fate bond that has reshaped royal succession, planning, and forced both our species to expand their understanding of how destiny operates. Ethan reflected on the strange path his life had taken. He'd been a junior cultural liaison, attending a ceremony because someone had to, and everyone more important had better things to do. He'd stood at the edge of a plaza, trying to be inconspicuous and respectful. And in one moment, without speaking, without acting, without doing anything except being present, he'd been claimed by fate through a princess's instinctive recognition. His life had changed irrevocably, bound to her path through customs he was still learning to understand. The Threnal kesh, fate recognition. The bond that required no words because it operated on levels deeper than speech or conscious choice. Standing on a palace balcony months after that fateful procession, watching Thalorian city lights shimmer in the evening, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Acceptance. Not resignation, but genuine acceptance that perhaps fate had recognized something he couldn't yet see. That perhaps being bound to Kaelira served purposes that would only become clear with time. She joined him on the balcony, her presence announced by the subtle shift in air pressure and the guard's respectful repositioning. "You seem contemplative," she observed, standing beside him at the railing, "just thinking about how one moment changed everything, how your pointing finger redirected my entire life." "Mine as well," Kaelira said quietly. "I did not expect to find my fate bonded during my ascension ceremony, did not imagine Threnal could manifest with someone from another species. But destiny operates without consulting our expectations or preferences." She turned to face him more directly. "Are you content, or do you still resent the bond fate imposed upon us?" Ethan considered the question honestly. "Both, sometimes. I didn't choose this. But I'm starting to understand that maybe choice isn't always the most important factor. Maybe being recognized as essential, being seen by destiny itself, maybe that carries value that transcends comfortable autonomy." "A philosophical answer," Kaelira said with a slight smile. "You are adapting well to Thalorian ways of thinking. I'm trying, though I'm still human enough to want to understand why fate chose me. What made me essential to your path when I was just standing in a crowd?" "Perhaps that is the question we will spend years answering," Kaelira replied. "Or perhaps the answer will emerge only when looking backward across time, seeing how this bond shaped events in ways neither of us could predict in the moment of recognition." She placed her hand near his on the railing, not quite touching but close enough to suggest connection. "But we have time to discover those answers. You and I, we are fate-bonded now. Where I go, you go. What affects me affects you. And together, we will navigate whatever path destiny has recognized, even if we cannot yet see where it leads." Ethan looked at her,